Hi, welcome to the NCSS webinar series based on previous content that we presented live at the Social Studies Conference in Philadelphia. My name is Annie Evans. I am the Director of Education Outreach for the New American History Project at the University of Richmond. And joining me tonight in this webinar are my friends Carolee Wong-Nakasuka, who is a teacher from Arcadia in California, and Dr. Katie Parada from Mercer University, the Tisch College of Education. And tonight we're going to speak with you on our presentation, Beyond Ellis Island, talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act, Angel Island, and historical empathy.
Okay, thank you for that lovely introduction. So this presentation highlights how teachers can promote the skills of historical empathy through examining the history and the legacy of Chinese immigration to the United States through Angel Island in California. And we really wanted to focus on this incredible site that bears such significance to our nation's history, because most times textbooks and our curriculum focuses on Ellis Island in New York, some will say New Jersey, but New York, where that influx of massive immigration from Europe, Latin America, parts of the Middle East, and people came through Ellis Island to then disperse and settle in the United States from the East Coast. However, a lot of our curriculum and our mainstream narratives of immigration to the United States do not really emphasize and focus on the importance that Angel Island bears to this history of immigration and the building of our nation and the stories and experiences of those who came through Angel Island, moving here from China. So we are highlighting Angel Island in this presentation as an example of how we as social studies and history teachers can bring these voices to life, voices in the curriculum that maybe we or our students are not really quite familiar with, and learning about different perspectives about the story of immigration in the United States through focusing on Angel Island in this presentation.
So we all are fans of inquiry. And in order to help get these kids into the story and into this content, I took this image from the National Archives, also from New American History, and bring it before the students and ask them, what do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? And we can use it in all different ways. They can pair and share. They can have it on their laptops, their Chromebooks, devices, and they can mark it up and look at it. And they can start thinking about what are they seeing, what is before them in the discussion.
And through engagement in inquiry, we can promote a lot of essential skills with our students simultaneously, particularly historical empathy through source analysis and inquiry through application of the NCSS, National Council for Social Studies, College, Career, and Civic Life Framework, also known as the C3 framework. Historical empathy is the three-pronged approach where students engage in source analysis in order to identify historical contexts from when documents were produced, such as in the example that we saw in the previous slide of Anna May Wong, explain how historical contexts impact the perspectives of those who lived in the past. So in particular, engaging our students in analyzing different perspectives and points of view as expressed from the past in historical documents, and then engaging students in making reasoned affective connections to content while explaining how the past and present differ. So in a nutshell, historical empathy is this marriage of these intellectual or academic skills of historical research, analysis, and inquiry, while also giving credence to the emotive or the affective responses students may have about studying topics such as the immigrant experience through Angel Island, while also acknowledging and trying our best to demonstrate for students that presentism can be an issue when we judge the past solely on our present day lens. However, bearing those differences in mind, having students really reflect on that significance and why we study about the past and in places like Angel Island. And the NCSS C3 framework is a really great method to start implementing these strategies that can promote historical empathy, which is what we're going to demonstrate in this presentation. And hopefully if you saw it in Philadelphia as well, where it is a circular process, not so linear in that each step must be followed in a particular sequence, but ultimately like a circle, like a process that if you start students with thinking about compelling questions and big ideas that relates to a topic of study through source analysis, students then can engage in asking further questions about perspectives and context as seen in historical evidence in order to not only make conclusions about the significance of historical content, but also how students can use that information to take informed action in their lives and in their communities. So the C3 framework is broken down into 4 dimensions. Dimension 1 is a really great starting point when you are starting an inquiry exercise, when you are starting a new unit of study. Big ideas and compelling questions are meant to be broad, attention-grabbing, and engaging for students to really think about the so what about why they're studying a topic. So a big idea typically is like a one-word concept or theme. So when we're teaching, let's say, United States history, some big ideas can include freedom, liberty, rights. Here we chose the big idea of opportunity. Why would people immigrate and leave their countries of origins and their homes to come to a new place? And coupled with that big idea is a compelling question. Again, broad, engaging, something to hook students' interest, but also a question that's broad enough that students' thoughts can evolve based on their primary source research on a topic. And so our compelling question was, are opportunities available to all Americans? And in order to engage students in this beginning phase of engaging in historical empathy, so understanding how context and perspectives of the past can be relevant to our lives today, Carolee shared with students a mind map where students brainstormed as a whole class and discussed the big idea of what is opportunity? What does that mean to them? And then student groups worked together to discuss and define opportunity and filled in the graphic organizer and shared their responses. And this kind of opening activity with questions and discussions are a really great way to prime the pump to also remind students that even if a topic is new to them, they do possess experiential knowledge of historical content and their own experiences in their lives that can apply to studying why Angel Island, is important to the fabric of United States history.
So when looking at the C3 framework, we want to make sure that teachers, some of us, I'm in Virginia, for example, don't follow the C3 framework as a statewide mandate, but we do have great similarities. So those of you who are joining us from states that do or don't follow the Common Core or the C3 framework, you want to make sure that you are using content standards, whether they be your individual state standards or the strands presented here through history, geography, civics or citizenship or government strand. So you're not just teaching the big idea, but you also want to make sure that you are linking your lesson in whatever standards it is that you're teaching at the local level.
The next step in engaging students in analyzing primary sources is a means to engage them in demonstrating historical empathy and inquiry, is then scaffolding student responses of the compelling question with more specific and targeted essential questions. You could think of your essential question as that main idea of, or the aim of your individual lesson plan. So how you would break down a unit on Angel Island and immigration to the United States with daily, or however you plan it with your students, to answer specific questions that, again, involve them in analyzing primary and secondary sources for context and background information in order to make those really deep and comprehensive responses to compelling questions that connect significance of past to relevancy to the present. And so in this lesson, we came up with 4 essential questions, and Carolee will talk a little bit about how she introduced these questions with her students. But we came up with these questions, again, as a scaffold for students to answer the compelling questions. So including, why did Chinese immigrants come to the United States? What were the conditions that they faced at Angel Island? Challenges that were experienced, and how did Chinese immigrants resist challenges that they faced? So we made sure that these questions were definitely a lot more specific, with fewer, if you will, subjective answers to these essential questions, in order to ensure that students had a strong foundational knowledge of the historical context of when immigrants came through Angel Island. But we also wanted to make sure that these questions allowed students to really consider their responses to the compelling question, and also to consider how immigrants, despite the challenges they faced coming to this country, were empowered and were not passive in accepting those challenges, but really working to not only resist, but also overcome those challenges, which we will see later on in this presentation, how Carolee did that with her students through the use of primary and secondary source research.
So it's important, crafting the compelling questions, the essential questions, everything is one of the most important part of putting together this inquiry. And then also choosing the sources, the secondary and primary sources that will help the students answer those questions. And so for middle schoolers, I would say the teacher will probably curate those resources for the students and can share them with them in different ways. And I'll show you later. You could share them digitally, you could have paper ones, etc. You could have each group work on a question and show them these are the docs that you need to use. So here you see you have the topic, you have the secondary source, you have the primary source, and you have worksheets to go accompany them to help them to be able to take apart that information and to help answer the question. So you see the next slide, this is the secondary source, and then the next slide you'll see that Katie put together a secondary source analysis worksheet to help, which is really helpful because students don't always know how to go through primary and secondary source docs. So to help them study this document together, I had them do it in groups and help them pull out the important information so that we were helping them to be successful in order to be able to answer the question. And then they do secondary source and they also do primary source. And then you see on the next slide, again, that they also look at the primary source document. So all these things, this took time to curate, to figure out the topics and the sources that were going to answer those questions. We want to set them up for success. But if you have high school students, you might not need to curate it as much. You may lead the students to sources, send them to New American History and Bunk History, send them to the National Archives, etc., and they will be able to find the reason. Maybe you'll give them a few resources, but they can go find those resources to help them, the primary and secondary sources to help them answer the question. And again, here's another primary source analysis worksheet to help them with the primary sources, which was very helpful.
Now, a big concern with teaching to promote historical empathy in social studies is whether or not you really can, as a teacher, assess students for demonstration of empathy. Empathy, broadly conceived, is something that can take a lifetime to cultivate and to hone and to practice. So when we talk about historical empathy as a pedagogical strategy, when we teach and when we create curriculum, we are talking about looking for students' demonstration of academic or academic understanding of content, but then also can students make reasoned connections to what they are studying. So in a nutshell, you're not really going to evaluate students on how they are feeling, but at least looking for evidence that they are starting to make connections between the topics of study and what they are thinking, their experiences, and something relevant in their lives. So this 5-level rubric, which really is derived in many ways from many years of research on historical empathy and derived from other historical empathy scholars in social studies, shows just an example of what you can do, particularly to give feedback on formative performance tasks when students are analyzing sources. A student who might be at a level 1 is one who might look at the past as inferior. So looking at the past and saying that, wow, the treatment of Chinese immigrants during the 19th century was really stupid. Yes, but can that student explain why those actions, those behaviors, those perspectives were not appropriate and wrong? It's also a matter of looking to see if students are able to use evidence from historical primary and secondary sources to explain that they understand a particular time period in the past and how that time period can be leveraged to be relevant today. And as you go through the rubric, level 2, level 3 students are expected to be able to analyze the past, be able to couch their understanding of people's perspectives and thoughts and experiences and actions based on document evidence, but are still making vague or kind of weak connections to that content, to their lives, to something relevant in their world. When a student is up to like a level 4 or 5 of proficient or excellent in historical empathy, and it may not, I mean, it could happen with a middle school class, it could happen with elementary kids, but we're talking about historical empathy as a process and not as a one-off that we do this activity and then it's over and everybody's going to be full of empathy. But when a student reaches around a proficient or an excellent level, they're able to cite and explain evidence from sources in order to explain, okay, why was it at a particular point in time this kind of behavior or these actions or these attitudes were acceptable? Can students explain that the past and present are different? And yet also, can students make relevant connections to this historical content to explain why historical study is significant, and then also them being able to apply what they're learning to taking some sort of action in the present. So this rubric is also meant to be used and adapted by teachers, but just at least an outline for at least being able to give feedback to students that we're not telling them what to feel or how to feel, but are they really engaging in their inquiry to take it upon themselves to better understand a different perspective than they may hold.
And in real life, this is how I implemented this framework in my classroom. And don't feel you have, the big message I want to give you is don't feel you have to reinvent the wheel. There are so many resources out there. You can reach out to all three of us, and there's so many different things that you can do to help bring students into inquiry. So if you look at this picture, if you look at this slide, I printed up primary source docs, and students are there studying it with a sheet protector and vis-a-vis expo markers, so they can look and they can circle the things that most important. I also have Chromebooks in my school, so that's the Anime Wong Chinese identity certificate, and students had that, and they could use Pear Deck, and they could mark it up, and they could examine it from the National Archives. And so you can see this collaboration. Collaboration is really important in inquiry. They were really working really well together in trying to solve and answer these questions. The next slide shows you that National Archives document analysis worksheets are awesome. So you do not have to reinvent the wheel, and these are scaffolded. You can see the younger version, the older version. You might want to start with the younger version first as you're training your students, and they have all different, analyze a photograph, print, all these different things. So I did use some of these also for my students to analyze the documents.
So this is a learning resource that we developed at New American History, and we're going to kind of pull these apart a little bit later on in the presentation. But all of the resources that we create, first of all, they're all free, and they're all OER, meaning they're open educational resources. There's no login, there's no password, there's no paywall. And they're meant to be sort of like Legos. If you have 15 minutes, you may just pull out a compelling image like you saw Cara Lee did, which is the document here talking about Anime Wong's certificate of identity. If you have 30 minutes, you may be able to choose 2 out of the 5 activities included in each one. If you've got a couple of days, great. You want to do a deep dive into this topic. We try and make them as flexible as possible so that you can integrate them in whole or in part along with other content, such as what Katie and Cara Lee have been sharing with you, the way that they've used it in their own teaching.
So this is another example. New American History's Chinese exclusion lesson is awesome. So the Anime Wong was a great into the lesson for inquiry. And then this is a immigrant who was in America, and he's reacting to the Statue of Liberty, and he's saying, you're asking everyone to pay money to pay for the pedestal for the statue. That's really great that you're appealing to American citizens, but wait, we're not American citizens, and you won't let us be American citizens. And it's a really great, I have many Asian students in my school, and it's a great, like Katie said, we don't just want to show, hey, look, you were, degraded and you were excluded, but we also want to see challenging what's questioning, using their voice to question what's not right. And so seeing this protest, seeing this strong voice is inspiring, especially for students who look like this immigrant. And so this is a resource from New American History. And again, the students used this primary source. It was a primary source, so they used the analysis worksheet to also take it apart to understand it on a deeper level. I also brought, in the next slide, I also used some family documents. So my grandfather came through Angel Island, so I shared a sheet of the interrogation with them. And actually, this is also in Flip. So I share that with Flip. And so you can go to Flip and you can use this topic and you can use it with your students and have them respond in a video. Once again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's so much out there. The next slide shows you, I brought my, when the personal is profound. And so because this is part of my family history, I've brought stuff to share with my students. And you have other things that it could be a medal that you won somewhere or a suitcase your grandpa brought. I mean, bringing that to show students that history isn't just black and white pictures from the past of dead people, but it still is relevant today is a huge, powerful connection. So this is a little vanity kit that my newlywed grandmother brought over with her husband from China. And it's the oohs and ahs. The first slide that I showed you was a case, and it was inside that case. Oh, you see it on the right side. that I didn't show them for a few days. And so they had to kind of be curious and guess what was inside. So taking it apart and having you talk about the ultimate inquiry, it was pretty cool. And then we took the kids to Angel Island. I'm talking to them about all this stuff. And then thanks to California State Parks program, it's free. I took my students to Angel Island virtually. And that was an amazing experience. They are live time in San Francisco on Angel Island with the ranger. They can ask questions, they engage with them, and they see like, hey, this is a real place. So like once I said, all these experiences are so amazing and so rich for the students. Well, maybe you can't schedule an appointment. Maybe you can't get into the live appointment to go visit Angel Island. Well, the next slide, you can visit it virtually with Sciarc 360. So Sciarc has amazing 360 images of all these notable places around the world. And Angel Island is one of them. So there's a virtual tour the kids can go on. They go with Ranger Casey Dexter Lee, who does a narration, talks about the poems and everything. They can visit by themselves. They can listen to poetry. They can listen to the narration. It's amazing. You don't really understand a place until you visit in 360. So the resources, the digital resources that are out there are incredible to be able to help bring history to life and help to get those students to access that historical empathy in them as they're looking at history that it has happened to real people and affects us still today.
So I'm going to share with you some of the New American History tools and resources that Carolee and others have used to teach lessons and teach historical empathy in the way that we demonstrated in the beginning of this presentation. So I'm going to come out of presenter mode, and I'm going to actually take you out to some of our live websites that you and your students can use. As Carolee mentioned, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Curating resources can be really time consuming. So we've tried to take some of that burden off of the classroom teacher and find age appropriate materials for students. This is our main website, newamericanhistory.org. Each month we kind of change up the content a little bit, so it's not going to look exactly the same from month to month, but this is where you can go to see what is the latest things that we have created. One of our signature websites as part of our toolkit for teachers is Bunk. This is a real-time curation of media, current media relating the past and present. So things that students are talking about in the news today are oftentimes related to things that they are studying in your history classes. And the idea behind Bunk is that everything is connected. So I'm going to select just a random article here. If it's from a print media, such as a journal or a newspaper, you're going to get an excerpt on the left-hand side. On the right, you're going to see this deck of cards. And in the middle, you're going to see different icons. And these are going to change based on the original piece of content that you selected. When you go to view connections, it's going to show you, here's your original piece of content you selected. In this case, it was from a journal article from Lapham's Quarterly that talks about how entwined history education is between history and patriotism. And then on the right-hand side, it's going to show you content that has one or more tags in common. So in this case, these two pieces of content are all tagged behind the scenes. We have students at U of R who work closely with our Bunk editors and archivists. So patriotism, textbooks, history education, national unity, etc. These are all different topics that these two pieces of content have in common. The thread here is searching by time period. So if you're looking at an article, what is something that happens later? What is something that happens meanwhile at the same time in history? What are some things that happen later? And you're going to see those tags change. If I go back to the original content and I don't want to search for time connections, I can search by people or I can search by key ideas. And each time you do that, you're going to get a different result. Students can explore just the tag. Maybe they want to look at patriotism. What do we have on patriotism? We have over 200 pieces of content tagged with just that one idea of patriotism. We also have a new feature where we have mapped out all of the content that's currently in Bunk. So not only do we have over 200 articles, this shows you geographically where those articles are pulling content from. So for each article that you select, you can click on a location in Bunk. And it's going to tell you, there are at least 3, 4 or 5 pieces of content related to patriotism in Philadelphia alone. And the reason that we added this feature was a lot of times students are sitting in class in your, local community, and they say, oh, this is so boring, or nothing exciting ever happens in my hometown. Well, here's a way that you can show them that actually history happens every day, everywhere. And you can zoom into the places where history happened and see what else happened in that same location. So we think this is a really fun new way for you to search content in Bunk. The Chinese Exclusion Act, for example, has 89 different pieces of content currently in Bunk, and we are constantly adding more. The next thing I want to show you is our digital atlas. This is American Panorama. It is a digital atlas where we try and visualize data using census records, using primary source documents on a variety of topics. Probably the most famous map in our collection is the map of redlining, mapping inequality. A lot of people don't realize that there are 3 other related maps, one on urban renewal, one on the lasting public health effects, and one on the environmental impact of people living in formerly redlined neighborhoods. Those all have gotten a lot of attention, but we have maps on the patterns that you can look at through elections, election records. Electing the House shows every House of Representative election from 1840 to the present. We have maps of overland trails, canals, forced migration. The one I want to show you that's kind of related to the lesson that Carol Lee presented, this is the map of foreign-born population. So we always start with a powerful hero image. You can have students analyze the image. This is a great feature that most of our maps include. It's how to use this map. So kids are learning skills along with content. They're learning how to look at data, how to look at maps, graphs, charts, which is an important skill in history. And then that takes you out to the live map. This is all based on census data. And you can see here, you can search by county name. So Carolee, what county are you located in?
Los Angeles County.
So if I type in Los Angeles, California, in the 2010 census, this is showing you where the most percentage of immigrants came from. And in the 2010 census, by a large amount, their largest immigrant population was from Mexico. But if we were to use this slider tool to go up to the 2020 census to compare, Mexico is still #1. Let's slide it back in time and see how the map changes. So for each decade, we see changes in immigration patterns. So it's been for several decades, the largest immigrant population has been from Mexico. But if I were to put in Katie's county, Katie, what county do you live in?
Fulton County, Georgia.
Just to compare, if we go to Fulton County, Georgia, the largest immigrant population in the 1940s came from Russia, or the Russian Federation, as it was known at that time. Now, during wartime, some of the records were not available, right? And so you're going to see there are pockets where there may not be any census data, depending on what was going on in the world at that time. Or there could have been a fire, documents got damaged. But we're going to go through here. By the 1960s in Fulton County, Georgia, you had a large United Kingdom was your largest immigrant population. Cuba in the 1970s, Indonesia, Mexico, and then we're going to see all the way up to the current India. So now in the 2020 census, your largest immigrant population comes from India. So students can start to look at changes in their own communities over time. You can drill down on this map. You can do the same thing with the election map. You can do the same thing with the redlining map if you lived in a city that was at least 40,000 in population. So each of the maps, in many cases, you can drill down to localize it and then move back out to look at the bigger picture. We also have podcasts. This is the Backstory Archive. If you listened, Backstory is one of the original history podcasts. It actually started off as a radio show. It was on for 13 years every Friday, and it was a group of historians, including our executive director, historian Ed Ayers, who hosted Backstory. And each week they took a topic such as immigration, and then they looked at it through the lens of multiple times in history. And they had different historians who were experts on different periods of history. So Dr. Ayers currently looks at history from the 19th century. Joanne Freeman, one of his co-hosts, was more of the colonial era expert, all the way up through modern times with Nathan Connolly. And so here's just, I typed in immigration and did a search. And here are all the episodes. We've also chunked them into shorter segments. So if you don't have time to use a full hour-long episode, you might just want that 10 or 15-minute chunk that really speaks to what you're trying to get at your lesson. Students can explore these. They can embed the audio clips in a National History Day project, or you can tag them into that resource list, just as Carol Lee did when she was curating her primary and secondary sources. The Future of America's Past. This is a TV series that was on PBS. We've written for full learning resources showing you how to integrate video as well as the audio clips and the other sources that we shared. One of the episodes, not talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act, but we do have some information on how the Chinese Americans were treated as the Transcontinental Railroad was being built. It has students analyzing an image of, we've all seen that golden spike image where they finally East and West meets. And there are very few Chinese in the image, even though many of them were present that day. So talking about how they were removed from the photo or not allowed to be a part of the photo, even though they were major contributors and many times risked their lives to help complete that. The other episode that we've had a lot of response to is the one that talks about people in the Japanese internment camps. And so we have lessons built out. And again, you can take them and you can use them in whole or in part. The last newest tool in our toolkit is called the Valley of the Shadow. This was considered widely as one of the first digital scholarship projects in the history of the internet. Dr. Ayers started this when he was an associate professor at UVA, and he and his students would scan documents from two communities, one in the North, one in the South, and they looked at documents from before, during, and after the Civil War in these two communities as a way to sort of communicate the larger story of what was going on. And so for each of these sections, you can look at historical newspapers, letters, diaries, census records, church records, military, all kinds of public records. One of the articles that I found interesting here talks about Chinese laborers, right? And it came from the Stanton newspaper, but there are thousands of documents and images and maps stored in here where students can kind of tease out and pull from that. So these are just some of the tools in our toolkit. And the last thing I want to share with you is sort of how we use these to create the learning resources that Carol Lee pulled from. So this is our learning resources library. And you can search by topic. You can search by grade level. You can look for specific strategies if you want more collaboration strategies, or maybe you're trying to build more inquiry into your lessons. So when I did a topic for Asian American history, these are all the lessons that have something to do with Asian American history, including the lesson that Carol Lee used. We have two versions of this. So this is the teacher version. It says for educators, and it's got this lovely cream background. This includes teaching tips and information about national standards that this particular lesson is linked to. We know that kids don't really need to see the teaching tips, and in some cases you may not want them to see the teaching tips, and they certainly really don't care about things like suggested grade levels or standards. So we make a whole separate student version. This is the one that you would link into your Canvas course or Blackboard or Schoology or Google Classroom, and this is getting straight to the heart of the content. So the images you want them to analyze, the key vocabulary that you want them to understand, and then jumping right in. We use a 5 E's inquiry model. So as I said before, we want these to be sort of like Legos. We've got them in a sequence that we think, gets them hooked in with the engage, and then they explore. And then as they go through each of the pieces, they dig deeper and deeper into the content. You have full control. If you only want them to do a portion based on the time you have allowed, or what other things that you want to integrate into the lesson, the way that Carol Lee pulled in her own family artifacts as an example, we make these flexible enough that you can use it in part or in whole. Everything you need is already linked in there. You don't have to go out and find all these resources and cut and paste them and resize the images. We've done all that for you. If there's a graphic organizer, we've made that for you. It's linked in as a Google Doc. Your kids can go in, they can make a copy of it, they can write on it, they can do whatever you want them to do, and then it pops you right back into the lesson. So we hope that these are useful. There's the map. It takes you right out to the map. The inquiry-based questions are already written for you. We partner with lots of sources. We have relations with the PBS, with Retro Report, with the Washington Post Made by History, Library of Congress. Everything that's embedded in here has already been a vetted, trusted resource that you can use with your students without fear of them going into, you know, something that you don't want them to see or may not be a reliable source. So we try and build these out knowing that we have a variety of learners. We include some accessibility features like Immersive Reader. It will read the lesson out loud to them. It'll convert into other languages for them. The kids can make the font a little bigger or whatever it is that they need. So we tried to think of as many ways to make these lessons accessible and engaging for your students. And that's what we are all about. So I want to go back to the slides as we just have a few minutes left to let you know that for every slide that has a link, we have embedded all of the links for everything that I showed you, that Carolee showed you, that Katie showed you. Those are all in the presenter notes. So if you go back to our original bit.ly or go into each slide, you're going to see hyperlinks where you can take this slide deck. You can pull out the slides that you want to use with your students, make copies of them, and embed them in your own slides. So we hope that you will reach out to us if you have any questions. We've included our contact information, our email, again, the bit.ly for you to get a copy of these slides, or you can use the QR code here. We want you to take the slides with you. Please share them widely with your friends. And we hope that you got something out of this presentation and that you will take a look more closely at what we've presented here and integrate them into your own students' learning. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.